Let's be consistent.
Welcome to today's episode of The Key to Consistency. I am your host, Rakia Collins, and on today's episode, we are going to be exploring together the relationship between creativity and consistency. We're going to take this from a couple of different lenses, so I am very excited to be talking to you guys today about the role that creativity plays, the role that consistency plays rather in creativity. So the first thing that we are going to think about is your creative pursuit, if you will, right? Do you play the guitar? Are you a writer? Do you paint? What do you do that requires a level of creativity from you that you enjoy doing, right? When you find that thing, if you don't already know what it is for you, when you find and locate it, the most important thing you can do is make time to practice that thing consistently. If you are a musician, for example, you know the importance of consistent practice. There is something about practicing consistently. Whether you are, consistently trying to play the right note, or you are just consistently trying to master that song. If you are a painter, you are consistently trying to, match your hues and your shades together, whether you're trying to create a mock of an existing piece, whatever you're trying to do and whatever you're trying to create, you have to have space in your life to be able to practice the thing that is very important to you. I can tell you from personal experience that while I am not super creative, I don't necessarily try to, paint or draw or anything like that. I think the best drawing that I could possibly give would be some stick figures, right? But outside of that, I do try my best to write and to journal. I find that those activities, writing and just journaling, even if I'm not writing or journaling about something specific, is truly cleansing to me. It allows me to get whatever is going on in my mind, to get it out, to get it on paper. And so I find that to be very, therapeutic for me. But of course, with anything, when you are doing something, you have to find the time to do it. And that's where that consistent practice comes into play, right? And to be honest, depending on the season of your life that you're in, that consistent practice may look very different for you, right? If you have a child that you take care of day to day, your time to practice for yourself could be when they take a nap. I know it is hard to not want to nap yourself when they nap, especially if they're younger, and when they're up, man, they are taking over the world, you feel like, right? But it is important to be able to just kind of sneak in those times of consistency, again, kind of depending on where you are in your life. This may not be as hard for you if you live by yourself. You are your main priority at that point, and so you can do whatever you'd like to do with your time. But in the event that your time may not necessarily be your own, I would encourage you to find time to try to consistently practice some things. If that means, I know on last week's episode we talked about TV. If that means kind of cutting down the amount of time you spend watching TV because you now want to get more into this creative habit, which is excellent, right? I would encourage you to do so. I think we all can name and we all know some very skilled and insightful artists. You think about, like Leonardo da Vinci, you think about Pablo Picasso, like you think about people who have really created pieces and works of art because they've consistently done what they've loved to do. And that's not to say, of course, we know that Leonardo da Vinci's first work was not the Mona Lisa, right? Was not the Last Supper, right? But those are some of the pieces that we know him for because of his meticulous attention to detail in his pursuit of really making sure that he effectively captures the essence of the human form, right? Those types of pieces did not come from his first time sitting down with himself and trying to create. And I know that it's, of course, hard because we know what that final product looks like. And that's what we're all trying to aim for our first time of doing something. But it is important for us to always remember that it is not just the first time we do something that is important. It is the reps. It is in that consistency where we really begin to make waves and change our level of proficiency in our creativity. And so for this first topic, I would just encourage you to set a regular practice schedule. I know that may sound boring, but I'm telling you, there is power in having a routine. When you have a routine of a practice, of a consistent practice schedule, it's going to be tailored based on your based on your availability, right? So that gives you the time to look at your schedule, whether it is daily or weekly or monthly, and you say, you know what, I know that tomorrow I have to do X, Y, and Z. That's going to take about 3 to 4 hours, but I will have 30-minute breaks, and so in between me doing something else, I can certainly fit in a couple of hours of writing, or if you have to, or not have to, but if you play an instrument and, you say rather than, going out with my buddies or, catching a quick drink, I am going to, sit and play on my guitar for 30 minutes or so. And I know that it doesn't necessarily sound inviting, and it kind of sounds counterintuitive when you think about, creating a practice schedule around creativity. But in order for your creativity to thrive and really have a space of its own, it is important that we set those boundaries around when we are going to practice and what are we going to practice on during those dedicated times. Today's episode is brought to you by the merch shop at thekeytoconsistency.com. I would encourage you to visit our merch shop to see if there's anything that piques your interest. One of the easiest ways to be consistent is to be visually reminded that you are on a mission. You are going to be consistent. So whether you pick up a phone case or you pick up a t-shirt, we have something for you. Again, that is www.thekeytoconsistency.com. And I hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. All right, guys. So the next thing that we're going to dive into as it relates to consistency in our creative pursuits is we're going to focus more so on establishing a routine, not the practice routine that we mentioned earlier. That is very critical. But we want to have what I'd like to call a creative routine, right? Where we know these are the things that foster my creativity. I know if I go for a walk during my lunch break, I'm going to see something, or I'm going to hear the sound of birds chirping, and that's going to put me in a creative space, right? Like, what does your creative routine look like? What do you need to do to help you foster inspiration and really help you kick up that productivity? That's what we want to talk about now when we think about a creative routine. It is important that your routine is really structured to who you are, that it is personalized, right? That it really fits the continuity of your individual preferences and your goals, right? So I just gave the example of going for a walk. If you are not a fan of nature, if you don't necessarily enjoy being outside, that may not be your vibe, and that is totally okay, right? You may be the type of person who says, listen, I get my creative juices flowing by just sitting and reading a good book. That's how I, get some creative juices flowing for me. Whatever that looks like for you, whatever that is for you, we want to make sure we find those buckets of, creative spaces and really adopt that and really turn that into a routine. So it may not be something that as I'm talking about this and you're hearing this is like, when do I feel the most creative, or when do I feel, inspired and at my most productive? It may not necessarily be, at a certain time of the day. It may just be, doing a certain activity makes you feel creative. It may be because you get up, super early in the morning. That's when you just feel a spark of inspiration. Whatever it is for you, we want to make sure that when you are your most creative, we're taking advantage of those times, because that is where you are really going to see success. And as always, when you think about, being more creative, there are always going to be levels of resistance, not just internally, because of course you are going to tell yourself, we don't need to do this. Yeah, this is a hobby. Yeah, it's something you like, but right now we're tired. So we're just going to, turn the TV on. We're going to, not do anything that really requires much effort at this point in time. So there is that level of internal resistance, but I also want to focus on the level of external resistance that you may get as well. Especially if you don't live by yourself. If you have a family, you may find that there may be some resistance from a spouse or from your children, because when you're trying to do something for you, they want your time. What I've come to realize with things like that is it is not them that is the problem, it is me. I am the problem because I am trying to do something for me that infringes on the time that I should be spending with them. And when you take that mindset that I need to make the adjustment, you begin to look through your day and say, you know what, rather than, doing this particular thing while my spouse wants to watch a TV show together or wants us to go to the park together, I probably could have, got off of work a little earlier and spent maybe 10-15 minutes, strumming up my guitar or practicing the piano or writing for a little bit before, everyone wanted to come home and go to the park and then have dinner, because that was something we already planned before, right? There are a lot of ways to, experience resistance. I just mentioned some internal and external, but I say that because we want to make sure that no matter the resistance that we experience, you remember why you're doing what you're doing. You are doing this because this is important to you. And I know that there are, some of you guys who might have heard about what it means to be in the flow state, where you're kind of no longer thinking actively about the task at hand, but rather things just seem to kind of flow from you. If you listen to or if you watch, the Olympics, Michael Phelps talks about being in the flow state, right? It's something that is pretty common among high performance athletes to talk about the flow state and what that looks like for them, where you are just doing something and it just feels so natural to you that you're no longer actively thinking about it. That is what we are trying to achieve by making time for our creative pursuits, by, of course, doing number one, setting that consistent practice schedule, and number two, personalizing our creative routine, knowing when we are the most creative and when we can pursue those creative activities. Outside of some, outside of some resistance that you may experience, there is also going to be the ability to maintain your motivation. That is tough, right? It is tough to stay motivated with something that you know you should do, but it's not necessarily second nature yet. It is in between the space of something I want to do and getting that thing to be second nature. That is oftentimes where people quit. Right? Like that's why they say, January 1 is where most people will sign up for a membership, but they'll be gone by February 15th, right? Because they haven't stuck with it long enough for going to the gym to become a habit for them, for it to become second nature for them. So I would encourage you that while creating routines definitely sounds mundane, I am right there with you. I am not just, telling you guys this because it is super easy to do. I completely recognize that this is going to take some shifting, but it is so important because you'll find that when you make time for yourself, when you do the things that are important to you, and yes, it is important to be devoted to others and care for others, but you have to also be a little selfish and prioritize yourself as well, because that prioritizing yourself is going to allow you to show up in the world in a better way. So next, we're going to give, of course, a quick action item as it relates to our creative routine. I would encourage you, if you don't know offhand, like you're listening and you're like, Rakia, I really don't know, when I'm most creative. I would encourage you to just do some experiments, right? Experiment with different times of the day, experiment with different environments, find out, what helps you get into that creative mindset. And once you find that out, do that consistently, right? Make sure you are at that place all the time. Make sure that you are doing it at the same time of day. Once you find that time and that space, similar to if you've taken pictures or, been on social media, there was a thing back maybe a few months ago, even a year ago, probably at this point, called the golden hour, where it just was that perfect time of day to take a photo. It was the golden hour, right? That's what we're looking for when we think about our creative routines. We are trying to find our golden hour. And of course, it could be golden hours for you, right? It may not necessarily just be an hour, but you get the analogy. Like that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that sweet spot. And of course, the last thing I want to talk to you guys today about is navigating those creative blocks, because they are going to happen. Even though we're going to work on, getting our practice scheduled daily, we're going to find blocks in our day where we can practice whatever our creative pursuit is. We're going to develop that creative routine where we know, what time of the day, we know what environment we need to be in order to feel our most creative. You can be at the right place at the right time, doing the right thing, and still experience a creative block. They are by far the worst. I will not pretend and tell you that it's fun to feel stopped up and to feel like you don't necessarily, like you have something to say, but you don't know what to say, because when you try to say it, you're saying it wrong, and it just feels like things just aren't even keel. It feels like things just aren't flowing the way you'd expect them to flow. And that is what we are going to get into now. It is the most frustrating thing, but the most, I'd say, rewarding thing when you find strategies to help you get over it. So one of the things that we're going to talk through first as it relates to your creative blocks are really making sure that you have the ability to move your body. As crazy and as simple as that may sound, moving your body and making sure that you have the ability to, whether you're writing something or you're drawing something and it it's just wow. Like, I am at a block. I cannot get this done because I can't think. Go for a walk, right? There are benefits, even going back to like the 1800s, when we think about Henry David Thoreau, when he says that when he moves his legs, his thoughts begin to flow, right? That is, I love that, because movement, not only does it make you feel better, again, we're very, very big on consistency on this podcast. And so anything that makes you not only feel better, you show up better in the world when you are moving your body, when you are getting out there and you are making things happen. And so I love that Henry David Thoreau credited that when his legs move, his thoughts begin to flow. You can also think about the study that Stanford did back in 2014. If you're like, listen, Rakia, Henry was back in the 1800s. We need something more current, more recent, right? In 2014, Stanford did a study that says a person's creative output increases by an average of 60% when they're walking. Both walking indoors and outdoors boosted the creative inspiration, as the act of walking itself and not the environment was the main factor, right? And so making sure that movement when you're feeling a creative block is extremely, extremely important. If you're the type of person who you're like, hey, I'm going for a walk and I am still stopped up, make a quick change in your scenery, right? There was an article that was recently posted in The Guardian by a writer named Jonah, and he cites that several new science papers suggested that getting away from your everyday scene, doesn't matter where you're going, is an essential habit for effective thinking. So whether you want to do something simple like head out to a new cafe, or, rather than working from home one day, you want to go to a shared workspace. You want to, go to a park and just sit in the park. Like, whatever you want to do to kind of switch up your routine is actually going to benefit you. It's going to benefit you a lot by just changing your environment and changing up the things that you see on a day-to-day basis. And of course, lastly, as we're thinking about navigating those creative blocks, the main probably use case that I even do to myself is I just take a break. I just stop what I'm doing and I just don't do it. And I'll come back to it. I'll set a timer and I'll come back to it. But I just stop, right? Because then I realize that I'm out of balance, because I'm trying to focus so hard on this one thing. And now that this one thing is elusive to me, I no longer am able to achieve the outcome that I want. And rather than just sitting there and being frustrated, just take a break. Just whether that break could include sleep, that break could include, as we mentioned, walking or changing your scenery, like whatever it is that you need to do. Make sure that you are taking a break in between your creative pursuits. That is so very, very, very important. And outside of those three that I've listed, I would say make sure that you are actively seeking out different sources of inspiration to fuel you, right? Listen to different podcasts, read different books, explore different forms of art, whether you like to go to museums or attend, exhibitions, or collaborate with other artists that may not necessarily be in your genre. They may not necessarily be doing what you're doing. It could be collaborating with a different writer who writes a different type or in a different style, right? Like, just collaborating across the board will really allow you to get your thoughts and your ideas flowing, because now you're in a space with someone who sees the world completely different from you. And that type of creative exchange, you just cannot put a price on that. So hopefully you are able to learn something about how consistency plays a role in your creative pursuits, how you can overcome those blocks that you might be experiencing, and ultimately with the goal of consistency lending itself to you experiencing growth in your artistic pursuits. And of course, a podcast episode here at the Key to Consistency would not be complete if we did not give a quote from our favorite book. And hopefully I'm saying ours because by this point, this is your favorite book as well. So this quote comes from Genesis 1:1, which is, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." I feel like that's a verse that we all know and love, but who is the master creator but the master himself? In the beginning, he created everything that we see and everything that we know. Remember, guys, consistency breeds mastery, and mastery transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of The Key to Consistency. Wherever you are listening to this podcast, it would mean everything to me if you could rate it, review it, reach out to me on Instagram. Would love your feedback, would love to hear anything you like, anything you don't like. Please feel free to share this episode with someone that you think could benefit from it. And until next time, bye guys.